Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us so early in St. Louis. It's great to see you. My name is Susy Stark, and I am an occupational therapist. I work down the street at Washington University in St. Louis. My expertise is actually aging in place. I'm interested in how older adults with chronic conditions can live successfully at home or where they want to live, and be engaged in their communities with community members. So I am really delighted to be here today. I have two panel members that are joining me in our panel of three. I'd like to introduce Jann Hartman. Jann, do you want to say a few words about who you are and where you?
Yeah, hi. I am from Seattle, Washington right now. I'll get into that a little more when I talk about my situation. I lost my husband to cancer in 2006, and so I'll talk and tell you about my life since that point.
And Sunny Roller, who has stepped in. Do you want to go? Oh, and go ahead, Sunny, just introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Sunny Roller, and I've actually rolled in, not stepped in, to take Audrey King's place, who was going to be here but couldn't make it. And so I am from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I've been semi-retired since 2005. And my situation is a little different. I've always lived on my own solo, so I haven't faced the dramatic change of a loss of a loved one that I lived with. It's been something that I've just done since I got my first apartment, so it's a little different perspective.
So I get the boring part first, which are to tell you the facts and kind of the evidence and what the literature says about aging in place. And then my esteemed colleagues are going to join with some personal stories and tips about what it takes to age successfully solo. And I think we've got such a great breadth of experience that hopefully will give you some great ideas. We would also like to invite questions from the audience. If you would raise your hand and ask the question, I will repeat it back into the microphone. We are videotaping this so people that couldn't make it into St. Louis can still take advantage of this topic if they would like to learn more. So we would invite and encourage your participation. We've been asked to keep this very discussion-based and informal and less scientific presentation-like. So please feel free to raise your hands at any time and interject or ask questions. I think we would be fine with that.
Oh, yeah.
Great. So let's start talking about aging. I know that everyone's heard, if you've read the newspaper or turned on the news, you can't avoid hearing about the aging tsunami and how by the year 2050 we're going to have this enriched, I call it an enriched sample of older adults in our community. So we're going to have, for the first time, more older adults than we've ever had before, which is great news. People are living longer. The bummer of the situation of living longer is your chance of having some kind of chronic health condition increases exponentially. The longer you live, the greater the likelihood you're going to have a chronic condition. So, and the other reality is, even though you're living with post-polio syndrome, that also increases your risk of experiencing other types of chronic conditions. So while 95% of older adults have one chronic condition, about 77% have two or more. So we're not just talking about living with something that you've probably adjusted to, figuring out how to manage post-polio syndrome. It's also figuring out how to manage these other additional chronic health conditions that might be impactful. The other interesting thing that happens when you live with a disability is an accelerated rate of aging in some cases. So older adults who have a disability are at an increased susceptibility for these kinds of chronic health conditions. So you're more likely to get high blood pressure earlier compared to age-matched peers that don't have something like post-polio syndrome. That's a new kind of area that we're just exploring, but it makes us stop and think about what can we do now with our lifestyle and how are we taking care of ourselves and how can we plan for the future so that we can do it independently in our homes or with who we want to age with and be successful members of our community. So I'm going to start out with all the scary stuff. I said I get the bad stuff, right? The healthcare provider gets, but I'm going to talk about geriatric syndromes that older adults are at risk for. The biggest issue on the table for me is falls. And right now, if you don't have any other risk factors for falling, 1 in 3 older adults over the age of 65 fall every year. If you add in any additional risk factor, such as taking 4 or more medications, having another chronic health condition, having weakness, which is something that could be a symptom of post-polio syndrome, that increases your risk, such that by the time you have 4 or more risk factors, your chance of falling over the next year, if you're 65 or older, is 80%. It's a very high risk. The consequences of falls are pretty significant and dire. They're more injurious than stroke. The results of living with a fall often are more injurious than a stroke. If you fall and don't have any health consequences, you don't have to be hospitalized, or you don't have to, nothing happens, you still actually have an increased risk of falling again in that same year, and that next fall could be the one that's injurious. So I'm all about trying to prevent these geriatric syndromes, and there's simple ways that we can do that. So now that's the scary part. We have these risks, so now what do we do in order to make it possible to stay at home and age in place successfully? There's lots of really good news out there. Bad news gone, good news coming. The good news is we can do things like exercise, if possible. We can do things like manage our environments, things like home modifications, making sure you have a really supportive environment. We can do things like becoming aware of the risks that we have. So there are really great programs out there, things called chronic disease self-management programs. Has anyone heard of those kinds of programs? Chronic disease self-management programs. These are programs that were started in Stanford, and often to manage health conditions like diabetes, but they're super useful for other health conditions as well. The basic tenet of chronic disease self-management programs is that you learn to figure out what the limitations are that you're experiencing for the whole range of chronic conditions that you might be experiencing, identify the risks or what's difficult, identify the barriers that you're encountering, and then come up with a plan or a solution to overcome these barriers. This is often done in a small group setting, so you have the benefit of brainstorming with your peers to figure out how they've managed their health conditions, and we're going to start a little bit of that today. So those are some it's a great kind of reframing of managing a health condition to make the health condition not something that happens to you, but something that you can manage and that you can create a safe place for yourself to be successful. We've all seen those images of super agers, those older adults that don't seem to have any chronic conditions, that are running marathons. And I think we need to re-envision ourselves, even with a little impairment here, a little impairment there, as one of those super agers. We can figure out what those barriers are, overcome them, and kind of live the best life that makes us as happy as possible, because that's the real thing we want to think about. So I wanted to talk about the fact that there are strategies, fixing your environment. I'm a big proponent of managing your environment to make you as independent and as safe as possible. What I see in my practice is as people age, maybe this doesn't happen to you, it happens to me, as we age, things change subtly. You don't even notice it one day. But my husband just said the other day, "Oh, this is so much harder to lift. Could you help me?" Than it used to be. It's just harder than it used to be. And we don't change our environments to keep up with those subtle changes. We kind of leave our environment static. But we have to rethink that our environment needs to constantly be matching the abilities that we have. So what can we do in our homes to make things a little easier? If it's a little slipperier in the bathtub, maybe it's time to get one of those no-slip stickies to put down in your bathtub. If it's a little harder to get off the toilet, I tell you what, how did they get shorter and shorter every year? Then it's time to get a taller toilet, so it's not so much work. so that when you're getting up in the middle of the night and you're a little bit groggy, you don't fall. So you have to kind of take responsibility and don't let those risks get on top of you. You have to make sure that you manage those risks before they become a problem. So taking a look at your environment again with fresh eyes, because like I said, things change slowly and we don't really realize it. So if you could, if you think you can't take a look at it with fresh eyes, you can always call in an occupational therapist to come and do a home visit with you, just to help you kind of identify some current and future potential risks that you might experience. We know home modifications work great. They work to prevent falls. They work to make sure that you are increasing your functional ability to the maximum extent possible. The other thing I want to talk about is as the environment kind of changes around you and it becomes a little more challenging, so does travel. I don't know about, even just think about getting to this meeting. Travel in your community, travel to get out and about becomes hard. So recognize that on average, older adults are going to spend about 7 years without the ability to drive. That's on average. That's a long time. So think about where you live and think about where you want to be engaged in your community. And early on, think about where you want to be so you can access your community or how you're going to get there. Because it might not be with a private car. And how are you going to do that so you can stay healthy and engaged? Because we know that one of the ways to age successfully is to keep up those community connections, whether it's church, going down to have a cup of coffee with your friends at the coffee shop in the morning, whatever it is, that community piece, that who you are, is super important. So stay engaged, make sure your home is safe. And then I mentioned chronic disease self-management. Figure out what the risks are that you have and how to resolve them, and take that on yourself. We have a lot of good self-managers here. I find that when we teach older adults, that's who I work with. You all look very young to me, by the way. I work with the 80-plussers, so you look like babies. And that makes me feel younger too, right? When I like to work with the 90-year-olds, so then I don't feel like I'm aging myself. So I find that when I teach people to help themselves, they're much better at it than I could ever be if I were there full time. So I conducted a study a few years ago, and it was on home modifications, which is my expertise. And we went in and we did home modifications, and we got them all set up. They were an average of 84 years old. We went in 2 years later to see how they were doing, and lo and behold, I kind of expected they would have gone up when I left them, and maybe they'd come back down to their baseline performance. They went up and stayed. And I thought, I am a brilliant therapist. I was patting myself on the back, thinking I did such a great job. I didn't. I didn't fix them into the future. What happened was we spent so much time with people showing them how to make home modifications, they continued to make them on their own. Once we showed them the basic strategy, they didn't need us anymore, which was great. They went on and continued to make those changes. I found out because our contractor would say, oh yeah, we got a call from your client, Mrs. A, Mrs. B, Mrs. C. They've all added more grab bars here and there, or they've added a lever door handle here. So it was really cool to see them empowered and making those changes themselves. And that is, I think, the key to making this work, is empowering you to learn a little bit and then make those changes yourself. That is what's going to make a huge difference. Connection in the community, transportation, chronic disease self-management, making the environment work for you, being aware of the risks that come with aging. You know, just by the nature of hitting 65, we're all at increased risk for things like falls. And being willing to take those on and be proactive, I think, is what's going to make the difference between successful aging and unsuccessful aging. That said, the topic today is solo aging. So it opens up a whole new window of challenges in that you have to do it yourself, right? So I think the other key element that I want to bring across, and then I'm gonna let my panelists join because I think they have far more experience than I do. This becomes so much more important that you're thoughtful and careful about all those things that I said, because it's not, you don't have anybody watching your back all the time. But there's some cool things that you can do, like you have to expand. The idea of community engagement's important for a husband and wife or somebody that lives with a partner. But it's so much more important to be engaged and have social support in your community if it's just you living alone. So making sure that what I said, all those little things, your home is safe. Yes, your home has to be super safe. There's nobody that's going to be there with you if you slip or trip. So you have to make sure there's no fall hazards in your home if you're a solo ager. So everything I said, plus. It all is really true for you every day if you're a solo ager. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's all the good evidence, but yes. Let's see if there's any. Oh, I did want to mention a couple of things that aren't always publicized. As you're solo aging, it might be sometimes difficult to connect to resources. So there's one resource, one-stop shopping that I know works across the country. Do you know about area agencies on aging? Mm-hmm. So if some of you are nodding, some people, connect with the area agency on aging. Every community has an area agency on aging. These are under the Older Americans Act, these are the service providers that provide nutrition for older adults. So home-delivered meals are probably the thing we're most familiar with. They also all have information and referral sources. So those of us that work in aging services around the country, we're all connected with our area agencies on aging, and you can probably find that they can connect you with whomever you need. Most of them have chronic disease self-management programs now. Most of them have fall prevention programs now. They also have access to transportation for tricky systems. So one-stop shopping, if there's no place else you go, as you age and hit that 65 mark, make sure you connect with your area agency on aging so they can help you connect with the services that you need. And that was kind of my list of big things that I wanted to go through from the boring stuff and scary stuff. Now let's hear the interesting stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I have a statistic here that I'm not sure Susy has heard of, so I want to start off with that. It says almost half of the people over 40 believe they look younger than they are. This says something important about older Americans. We have terrible eyesight. Well, my story started about 8 years ago when we got the news that my husband, who was healthy, he rode a bike, he was everything, able-bodied and helping me, my caregiver, and whatever. We found out he had an aggressive form of cancer that had already spread, and he was only going to live maybe to the end of the year. We found this out in February, and by September, I had lost my husband of 36 years. So right there was a big change that I had to make because I hadn't thought ahead to what I would do. It was just a brief, what would I do if John wasn't here, but it was pretty much he was going to outlive me. That was what I figured life was going to be like. So we had a lot of planning that we did at that state, but at that time, when somebody's going through chemo and radiation and whatever, they're not thinking real clearly. I remember him doing taxes that year because he was a tax consultant. The next year we were audited after he passed, and I don't know if it was because of something that was in there or if they do that automatically when you lose a spouse, but I would have liked to have had somebody else do it because I didn't know whether he could or not, but what he had looked good, and I had never done it before, so we went ahead and filed that. So I think, and I think that women need to know need to know all the finances. Get it all together and put it in a loose leaf notebook and make a list of all your credit cards and the numbers and the banks and where your financials are, who's going to take care of it when you don't, because retirement benefits and things like that are going to fall to me because he's not going to be here. So I worked all that out, and I went to a CPA, I went to a financial planner to help me deal with all of this stuff. And also dealing with just moving everything. As a surviving spouse, I did okay, because most everything just came to me. However, every once in a while you run into a benefit that wasn't, or a beneficiary that wasn't listed. I was not listed on one according to this financial institution. Everybody we talked to gave us a different answer, and we tried to get the information to them and the death certificates that were needed and whatever to get all of the things transferred over to me. So it happened, the important things happened seamlessly, pretty seamlessly, so I feel fortunate. Do those important things first. I mean, the things that you have to do is, as far as letting people know that your spouse is no longer there. Other things can wait a little bit, you know, and they say wait a year before you move, before you make any large decisions or move or whatever. And I recommend that. I didn't have that luxury, though. We had sold everything, and we were RVing. We were full-time RVers. We lived on, I grew up on the East Coast. We lived up there. His parents and my parents were in Florida. And so we would visit them in the winter months when it was cold. We would go up to Canada or up north in the summer. And then all three boys ended up out in Washington State. So now I'm in the other corner of the world, living out there with our middle boy. And the nice thing with that was when my middle son called, I remember the phone call when he said, Mom, what do you, well, after how's Dad and everything, Mom, what are you going to do now? And I said, I don't know. I'm homeless because I can't pull the RV. We had a small travel trailer, and we were going to have it equipped so that it had a lift on it. There were things we had already had in the works and planned and whatever. So those plans were shot down. But we had done a lot of travel previously, and I feel very fortunate that we got to do things that they talk about a bucket list, and my bucket list is quite short. There's things that I may never get to Australia. That was kind of on there, and it's okay. But I've been places that I never thought I would go to, and he was a great travel partner. You talk about traveling. I didn't have to worry about getting to St. Louis on my own, but I was at Warm Springs with the previous conference, and at St. Louis, the last time they had it here, we were parked over at the casino and took the metro over to the hotel at that time with my husband, who was still here. So that makes things more difficult. My life has become more difficult, but it's manageable. It's manageable. You just have to give it time and have to decide. When I bought this travel scooter, it kind of frightened me in a way because it folds up, and you know, I have to do the you know, I have to worry about it working, because if something happens, I don't have my travel partner who could fix anything. I felt much more confident in that way, and I had said that I just have to take it and get used to it and learn to travel with it. So for the past about 6 years, because my husband passed 8 years ago, I have been using the scooter, and I have gone cross-country several times. My parents, who are aging in their home in Florida, in a gated community with church support and whatever, are able, I think they've learned a lot from me, as far as they have ramps, and my dad and mom both have a scooter at this point. They've done a lot of things that they can do to age in place. And I think from us, the older generation is learning some things, because otherwise I don't think older adults like to use even canes and crutches and things like that, but my parents grew up with it. So I think I'm influencing them, which I really hadn't realized before. You know, so that really works out good. I think one of the first resources that I ran into when I moved out to Washington State, my husband moved out with me, so we got out there 3 months before he passed. And I think it was important to him to get me out there. I think that was in the back of his mind. Again, prioritizing things. There were things I could do after he wasn't here that I wouldn't bother him with. He wanted to drive out, actually, from Florida to Washington State, kind of our last trip. We all knew that wasn't going to happen, but we didn't burst his bubble on that. We just, when the time came, we flew out, which was the obvious thing to do. And he got me out here, got me settled, or not here, got me out there and settled. And it was summertime, and that's a beautiful time to be there. So it was just lovely. He passed 4 days after our 36th wedding anniversary, and that was really tough. That was a bittersweet time, because we knew hopefully he would make it to 36, but we knew he wasn't going to make it beyond then. So it, you know, it was good, and I mean, everything, it's like I said, bittersweet. So I mean, right after he died, I wanted to curl up in a ball in a fetal position and just let the world go on. What am I going to do without him? So, but I knew deep inside I was a strong person. I had lived on my own before, and I could support myself, and the boys were grown. I was thankful for that I didn't have children to take care of, although there's women in that position too, where they'll have a child or whatever. So you do whatever you have to do. And I felt very alone, but I joined a church group with a friend of mine, saying, you know, why don't you do this? And that was great help, because there were a bunch of widows and women that were on their own that I could have lunch with, that I could go, you know, if I wanted to go somewhere, I didn't have to go alone. And there's a lot of things that I could do, and I thought I ought to do that, but now I need someone to go with me, you know. So anyway, that helped out a lot to find out those resources and whatever. So I say it kind of takes a village, you know, to replace one person, you know, and it's amazing. I don't have the person that's intuitive. I mean, it's a shame, because people always, when my husband came to a gathering like this, he was the one that would go get somebody water if they needed it, or if they looked like they needed food or something, he would get something. So he was very helpful, and I wish I could have cloned him rather than lose him. So, you know, I mean, it's a loss, but then you get over it, and you find that strength, and you go on. And actually, I don't know how many of you belong to Post-Polio Health International, but it's a great organization. And their newsletter is absolutely wonderful. My story is in the fall edition of 2010, and it's not going is not an option. So that was what, I have several pictures of my different scooters. And it shows you that there are different things out there. What I use may not work for you, or actually I think, let's see, I have 2 different scooters, and I have an electric wheelchair that's a used one. And I use them at various times. So it takes more than just one, you know, if you can, you know, get some other assistive devices that work better for you. I find, because a lot of people think, well, I need just one, you know, travel scooter and I can use that. But there's different options for different people. We're not all, you know, the same. It depends on your situation. I know that in the future that there will be more changes, because I know things don't stay the same, and I just try real hard to get my friends and everybody, like celebrating birthdays and anniversaries hard, but I try to enlist friends in that. I went back home and found, I just called my friends and said I would be back during the month of September, and we worked it out that I could visit various families, and one person would take me to the next person's house after a couple of days or whatever it was. At that point, only 1 out of 4 families had a ramp in their house, and that was because my friend had broken both her ankles. And so that was the most accessible house I was in. The other ones weren't. It was up a step or 2 or whatever, which I was still able to do. Today, looking back, all of those families now have ramps. They have all made adjustments. So if you feel like, well, I'm a burden to them, they got to pick me up, what am I going to do? Is don't worry about it. You know, just when they invite you to go, or if they don't invite you, you can ask. You know, I'm going to be, you know, in the area and whatever, you know, and can we get together? And your friends generally will step up. So I say yes. In fact, one friend and her husband, I went to Hawaii with them for 9 days. And they asked, and this was about a month after my husband had died, and I thought, I don't know. I mean, how am I going to do this? All these questions and stuff. But I said, yeah, let's see if we can figure it out. So I ended up with a lot of good trips with friends that really were willing and able to help, even if they didn't exactly, you know how they were going to help or whatever. So it's been a long 8 years. I'm still here. I'm still going. And I'm looking forward to more.
Nice.
That is a very nice story, and thank you. So now, next time I give this talk, I'm going to amend it based on what Jann said, because I think the message that she just gave us that is so important is take a risk and keep all those boring things in mind that I said, but then to take a leap and to figure them out along the way is so inspiring to me. To say, yep, I'm not quite sure how the physical environment is going to support me, but I know that it's really important that I stay connected with family and friends, so I'm going to give it a go. I think that is, so don't let what I said stop you, I think. Listen to Jann, not Susy, is the message today. That was really nice. Do you want to go ahead, Sunny, and give us a...
Yeah. Can you hear me if I just am here? Can you hear me okay? Or do I need to get closer? Is it better this way? It's better? Okay, I'll lean forward. My presentation is, as I told the panelists, I'm kind of shooting from the hip. It's just casual, and I wanted to answer questions that you might have. So I would like to invite you, as I'm just beginning with some ideas I can share with you, to ask me questions, because I've got lots of information inside of me. I just haven't written it all down. So please just ask me questions. I'll just start with a few things that I'd like to share. This is about aging solo. Now I've, like I say, ever since I was 21 and had my own first apartment, I've lived alone. But I would say if I wanted to start my presentation with the aging piece, I guess I would start when I was 59. I bought my first condo. And so when you talk about home modifications in your home, that's probably the first thing I would think of as far as aging, especially with a disability that's slightly complicated. So what I was lucky enough to do, my friends were out. I had just lost my whole family in Michigan. My mom and my sister and my father had all passed away, and they were my basic family there. My other siblings, one's on the West Coast and one's on the Florida coast, so I was really feeling far-flung. So anyway, my friend was looking for a house for herself, and she came across this new condo development in Ann Arbor, and she called me. It was a Sunday afternoon. She said, "Sonny, you got to get over here." And I said, "Why? What are you talking?" She said, "I think I found the condo for you." And she said, "If you don't get over here, I'm going to come over and drag you over there." And I said, okay, I'll be over. So I went over, and it was just a quarter. It was a development that was only 1/4 built. The contractor was still, they were selling units before they were even built. And so I went into, the couple of the units, and I went, yeah, this one would be pretty nice, because it was all on one floor. And so my friend jumped in and talked to the contractor, who was a really nice guy. He happened to have some disability in his family somewhere, so he got it. And she said, "Will you work with somebody with a disability as you're building this?" And he goes, "Sure, I will." So that was just a thrill. I decided to go for it. And so I worked for a year with Mike the contractor, and he said, "You just tell me what you want and pick out the unit you want. I want to give you one with absolutely no stairs," because I used a scooter at the time and was walking precariously on crutches and braces. So he found me the right unit, and I waited a year for it to be built, and I would meet with him, and we adjusted like where light socket should be. For somebody in a wheelchair, it's nice to have them up higher. And light sockets that are close to where you approach a counter, not way in the back of the counter, but up front. I know Susy knows all this stuff. And we were doing all kinds of little things like that, threshold ramps, and oh gosh, I'm trying to remember all the little stuff we did. It wasn't super major, a lot of electrical stuff, but it was really helpful. And at the time, I was still walking. And so my friend and I decided that we didn't want to super adapt the kitchen, which now I'm kind of struggling with. And that's one point about adapting and aging solo that I want to point out. It's an ongoing labor of love. I mean, I feel like I've done some things correctly and they're really helpful, but I've got challenges ahead too that are sometimes they're ominously huge, you know. Like if I really wanted to cook full-time in my kitchen, which I sort of don't because I'm not that great a cook, but if I wanted to give myself the opportunity, I'd have to, you know, have the stove completely reconfigured and the sink reconfigured, and I think you're talking $5,000-$10,000 to do that. So I make it work. I get lower tables and work on those, and I learned how to pull a drawer out and put a cutting board on the drawer, and then I've got a lower counter. You know, and one of my friends said to me, you know, anytime you build a kitchen, you should always put in sliding, what do they call them, breadboards that you can pull out from the counter, because it automatically gives you a low counter. Little things like that make a huge difference. Just finding the breadboard that fits on top of your drawer perfectly is a challenge, but it costs you like $10 max, you know. So there's little things that are real. Oh, and the other thing I did purposely, I had, as I was planning my condo, was I got front-loading washers and dryers installed instead of the other kind, and I got a raised toilet seat, which is really helpful. So that kind of stuff was important to think about. And what I did actually is I worked with an occupational therapist friend who came over to the unit when it was half built, and we went around and picked out things. I also found an architect who went around with me. It was really a blessing to have a year to figure it all out. And we went around the unit and looked at what, you know, what could be changed and adapted. So it was really fun. I just loved doing that, and I love my house. It just is my friend, you know. And yeah, it's not perfect, but it's wonderful. And I so appreciate the opportunity to be in a place that's accessible like that, because there were so many condos in our community that aren't. You know, you go in, you either have to go up or down a level, up a level, that were built like in the 60s, and I was really not sure I'd find anything, and I just feel like it was a real blessing. And then to be able to work with a guy to make it work, you know, that was really special. Another thing I wanted to mention that I think is critical, you know, this presentation is all about aging solo. Well, I really think it's kind of a misnomer. I don't think anybody can age solo. I may live in my house technically by myself, but I have a huge network of friends and community members that I couldn't live without. You know, I can't age in a vacuum. I can't age by myself. In fact, I'm hardly living solo because I've decided I want to rent my extra bedroom and bathroom out to students, which is great fun. And so they come and go, and they're fun company. I had a woman from China stay with me for 6 months this past year, and it was a very interesting experience. I learned a lot. And then I have friends that are from out of town, and they come and spend weekends or weeks and stay with me. So I don't feel like I'm completely alone, and I am an active member in a church, and that makes a huge difference. So I think it's really important to have as big a network of friends as possible when you're talking about, quote, aging solo. And also a bunch of good healthcare professionals that you know, that you can go back to when you need them. That's really important too. Make friends with your healthcare professionals. That's a lot of fun. So that's really important. And one of my friends said to me, she said, Sonny, she said, you got to tell the people something. And I said, what? She said, you figured something out that maybe a lot of people haven't figured out, because she's my key helper friend. I call her for all kinds of things I might need, and she's just a full-service friend, I'll tell you, which is a really blessing. But she said, tell them that when you ask people for help, which is another important point, I'm never afraid to ask people for help, very, very rarely. Assertiveness is just critical if you're by yourself in your home. But when you ask people for help, tap into who those people are and what they're good at. She said, I would be terrible at helping you decorate your house for Easter. She said, I hate doing that stuff. But she said, I'm great at driving you to the airport. She said, and that's really a smart thing to do, because then people don't mind helping you. and they don't hesitate if they have the time and the inclination. So that's a key tip to remember when asking friends for help. Ask them to do things they like to do or that they're good at, and they'll feel really good about helping. Another thought that I had, and I just lost it. What was it? About friends. I'll come back to it. I can't remember. Oh, I know. I did a study for NIDR, and I went around the country and asked post-polio support group leaders who their role models were for aging gracefully. And so I got to interview 15 people around the country, and one of the women I interviewed that was living by herself and had polio, I asked them what were their keys to successful aging. One of the women said, "I always make a point to make friends that are young." She said, "You got to have a good bunch of young friends." And I think that means at least one, like 20 years younger than we are. She said, "It's a wonderful asset. They can help you. You can share with them your wisdom, and it's a great exchange." And I thought, that is really wise. You know, she was a wise elder when it came to that. I thought that was great. So that's kind of a goal of mine. Where do I find young friends? You know, but they're out there, and they're really fun to connect with. Things about appliances and braces and crutches and all that stuff. I agree. I think that I need, because I'm living by myself basically, I need to have 2 scooters and 2 wheelchairs. I need a backup for everything I really need. I suppose I should have 2 CPAPs too, but I don't have that. But I had a time once where I was sitting in I use a manual wheelchair in the house, and then I use scooters outside the house. And I have a van that has a ramp, and I can drive it. It's accessible, handicap accessible. I drive with hand controls. But one time I was just sitting in my manual chair, and I heard this crack, and I thought, oh, this isn't good. And the frame cracked. It was an old one. And luckily, I had a backup. But if I hadn't, I would have had to, well, I probably would have just gotten on my scooter, but I needed that. And then I could, get rid of the old one and stuff. But that was scary, because if I hadn't had a backup, I don't quite know what I would have done. So it's important, I think. It makes me feel more secure, anyway, to have 2 of everything. Which gets to another point. Being disabled is expensive, and it's getting more expensive. And that's an unmet challenge that I have, too, is just where to keep finding the money to get all this stuff that you need. And I just forge ahead in faith and take that risk and go, well, it's going to work out and I'll find a way. But boy, I'll tell you, it's not easy financially, especially when you're aging by yourself. I don't have anybody that's going to support me financially. And my life has always been like that, but I don't know, it just gets a little more scary the older I get. So that's an ongoing challenge for me. And so planning and working and trying to stay healthy, so I can work and continue to contribute the way I'm used to, and also earn a living is important, which gets back to taking good care of our health especially when we're on our own, I think it's important to stay active, like Susy said and everybody said, because it just keeps us more vital. And you don't want to curl up in a ball if you're living alone. That's terrible. That's like death, So I think it's important to stay active in the community and have as many community connections as possible, because you have a lot to give them and they have a lot to give you. And that's the way we were made, I think. And so I think that's especially important if you're living by yourself in your own house. So ask me questions. What are you thinking? Yeah.
How do you handle the snow in Michigan in a scooter?
Yeah, good question. Oh, thanks, John. I'm getting a little hoarse here. This winter was ridiculous. And usually I can go any place I want in the winter if they shovel the drives like they're supposed to, and they usually do. But this winter got on top of, I mean, it was hard for the plow guys to even stay on top of the snow. And so, like I say, in normal winter times, I go out and just go from my garage door to my car that's outside and get in and take off. But this winter, I actually was stuck in my house for 9 days because my scooter wouldn't go through the snow even. Yeah. So I had to, you know, really deal with cabin fever, which was kind of weird, you know. I did it, but I was glad when spring came, that's for sure. So scooters in the winter, you just have to know your scooter. This one wouldn't get through much at all. I think you have to have, when you're going to buy a scooter, you got to know your weather and your climate and buy one you think could do pretty well in the snow if you're in a snowy place, you know. So I always have my cell phone on my scooter too for emergencies. One time I was out in my garden and my scooter went into the garden and dropped from the sidewalk, and I fell into a bush, and I couldn't get out because the scooter was on top of me. It was so heavy. And so I called 911. Luckily I had my cell phone, and they came and got me. It was kind of embarrassing. The bush didn't last either. I wrecked the bush. But, you know, you never know.
Better the bush than you, that's
Yeah,
all right.
right. Yeah, so, any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the questions are, how do you handle having low energy, and do you deal with, have you dealt with depression?
Mm-hmm.
And Jann, you can jump in too.
Yeah. Jann, you want to go first?
No, let's go ahead.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Low energy, okay. I think both of these questions are better for the physicians because they've got all kinds of ideas about how to keep your energy level up and that kind of thing. Are you talking about in the context of living alone and getting bummed out because you're living alone? Or just in general? Is that where you're coming from? Is it like from a grief? Like you've lost somebody and now you're alone and depressed and not a lot of energy? Or? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just in general, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, well, it's all, you know, that's a general post-polio question for anybody, no matter where they're living, I think. And I think that has to do with your overall health and making sure you're physically well and going to a physician. And then, you know, there's many answers to that question, why low energy? You know, it could be from a depression kind of a thing, or it could be because you're lacking vitamin D. You know, it could be a lot of reasons. And I know for me, just as a person, I kind of have waves, you know, of times. I had low energy during that cabin fever time. I'll tell you, that was a drag, and I got kind of bummed out. You know, it's like, get me out of here, you know. But I mean, in the summer when things are great and my flowers are blooming and friends are coming in to see me from all parts of the country, then I'm feeling great. So it just, it's an individual thing, and I think I can't answer that as well as, I think the sessions on energy and exercise and yoga, and all the things that have to do with the body, and are an important place to start with that. Yeah. But I don't think we're necessarily condemned to having low energy because we had polio. I think there's lots of stuff we can do about it. But pacing is really important too. We have to pace ourselves because we're not the same as some others, you know. I'm sure that didn't help, but at least, you know, I would just heavily recommend to go to all the sessions you can about the body today, because that'll answer a lot of questions.
Thanks, Sunny. I thought I would add on as the healthcare professional too. One, often it's important to bring to your physician's attention, again, if you truly do feel like you have symptoms of depression. Often we'll say, it's pretty normal to be bummed out that you're living with a chronic disease or illness. But if you say, but it's affecting how I'm functioning, then that's a red flag to them, and you can kind of advocate for yourself that maybe there's something else that needs to happen. So that's one tip I'll throw out there. And again, this is the kind of solo aging, so I think there probably are other sessions that would have more information. But the second thing, and Sunny, you mentioned this, is pacing. But I'll expand on that a little bit to say it's important that you set priorities and recognize that you only have so much energy in the day. And it might mean that you don't wash your dishes on Tuesday so you can go play bridge with your friends. And that's an okay decision that you'll have to pat yourself on the back for, because staying engaged with people, as you see from our excellent role models, is actually one of the keys to success. So giving yourself permission to prioritize one activity over another, I found is one of the really important things that people do. Because as you age, as you have more chronic conditions, as you have a lot to deal with on your plate, it might be all that you can do that day to go to bridge, but that's probably the most important thing to do. The other thing to remember is you don't have that personal support to help you put your pants on or get your socks on. So again, go back to making that environment as easy as possible. Buy the kinds of socks you can slip on and make it easy. Make sure that your closet is set up so you don't have to spend so much energy doing the things you want to do. I think the way Sunny set up her condo probably is a way that she saves a little bit of energy every day so that she can garden, or something that's important and meaningful to her. So think about your energy costs and where you want to spend it, I think, is the important thing.
Yeah, and one of the things I could throw into, one of the things that the wise elders quote that I interviewed around the country reinforced for me is, because these guys are just aging and they're happy, you know, they're just doing it. They emphasize the importance of staying in the positive as much as possible, surrounding yourself with positive thoughts and positive people, positive books, all that you can, because that produces lots of good energy. And to stay away from the negative. You know, even if it means not watching the news 3 times a day, and that can create a lot of anxiety for anybody. But it's not just a nice thing to do. I think it's a critical thing to do when we're slightly more physically fragile. And that's something we've learned as polio survivors over the years, you know, to focus on the positive. That's a major coping mechanism that we've employed, and it's still important. And if we find, or if I find myself slipping out of that, I'll go, okay, what's the garbage in, garbage out thing? You know, what am I taking in that I shouldn't be? And a lot of times it's stuff on TV, or I just stay away from naggers and raggers, people that'll pull you down. I just can't do it. You know, it's going to make me fall. Or it's got a physical effect on me, and it'll zap your energy really quickly, I think. So for me, that's another trick, you know. Yeah.
You were speaking about getting your car modified so that you could drive with hand controls.
Mm-hmm.
How to get that done? I mean, how do you know where to look?
How did you get your car modified for hand controls, and how did you figure out how to get it done?
Well, that I did when I first learned to drive, when I was 21. Most kids learn to drive when they're like, 16 or something. Well, my dad said, no, you can't learn to drive until you can get the right kind of car, because my legs were always paralyzed. And so when I got my first teaching job, I could buy my own car. And so then there was a place in Ann Arbor that would taught people how to drive with hand controls. It was a place, it was a business where I went and actually spent a week. I stayed there overnight for a week, and I went out every day with a driving coach, and he taught me how to drive on their hand control vehicles. And then there's a place in Michigan that puts those on. The name was Gresham Driving Aids, and they put on the first hand controls on my first car. And I've been driving with them ever since. They just transfer them or put new ones on. I just go there. And then what I bought now that I'm not walking so much is, back about the same time I got my condo, is a van that's got a lift so I can just pull in my scooter. Then the seat rotates, and I can transfer from my scooter to the driver's seat, rotate, go forward, turn on the car, use my hand controls, and off I go. Yeah. So it's, just variations, I think. But there are places that do that, yeah. Uh-huh.
I think that's a big factor in trying to stay active, because so much, you're starting to lose your strength. You're not going to be able to manage your own transportation.
Right, and those hand controls really aren't that expensive. They're only a few $100s. The vans are $50,000. They're huge, but the controls aren't, they aren't that bad. So, you're not using your feet and stuff anymore. They're an easy fix, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So adapting your van is one great strategy, or your car, but there's also other strategies for transportation. So there are some really nice programs there's been a great awareness in the U.S. across the country now that we're going to lose the ability to drive before we're ready to not be engaged in the community. So things like Google cars are probably in the future. We'll probably see cars that drive themselves. There are also really nice community transportation systems that have been set up informally and formally across the U.S. So the idea that while you're still able to drive, you volunteer and put some credits in as a driver into this driving system, and then when you're not able to drive anymore, you can start pulling your credits back out. So you do good for someone, and then you can have someone do good for you in the future. So that's kind of a neat program that's been developing across the U.S.
You mean people drive each other around?
So it gets you community engagement with maybe meeting a new friend, but it also gets you the ability to get to where you need to go. So there also, if you call the area agencies on aging, if you need to get to the doctor, for example, and you're not able to get there, there's often transportation that will come and take you for those kind of practical things. I personally want to make sure you can still get to the symphony or the ball game or church, and those are a little harder to get rides out of the area agencies on aging. So some of those kind of credit programs are neat. But we have, in St. Louis, we have a county older residents program, the CORE program. And that's a group of volunteers that will take people to certain places, including the Muni or the ball game. So make sure you tap into the informal and the formal network of non-driving transportation too. That's an important thing to think about for the future, in case you're not able to use your hand controls.
Yeah, in some communities, I know ours does, have what we call the AATA, the Ann Arbor Transit Authority, and that they run the buses and the taxi cabs in the city, but they have this whole arm of their company that has special travel things for seniors and people with disabilities. And so you can actually call and order a handicap accessible van to pick you up and drop you off and then pick you up again to a place. Or you can take an accessible bus, or if you're a senior, you can go any place in the county for like $1 in a regular taxi, which is really nice. And the prices are adjusted for people with disabilities too. So if you don't, you could check to see if there's anything like that in your community as well.
And here's another tip. The thing that's kind of neat about this group is that you are good at tapping into disability resources. That's been part of what you do. Most older adults refuse to tap into disability resources. They don't want to think of themselves as having a disability. Most people with disabilities don't want to think of themselves as older adults. The reality is both groups benefit greatly from most of the services, equally benefit greatly from most of the services that the different organizations have. So as a clever, savvy person, I suggest you tap into both and pull from the shelf whatever services are going to benefit you and the lifestyle that you want to live. Because who cares about perceptions of aging or disability? Go and get the service you need and get to the place that you want to get and do the things you want to do. And I think your tips are good.
And there's lots of hidden resources that, unless you ask, you'd never know. And once you start digging around with certain agencies, it's like, you do that? Wow, cool, I'm on, you know. And but unless you ask, you wouldn't know, and that's key. You just have to, you know, advocate for yourself and just go for it. Yeah, and we're really models for the aging because we've been doing this for a while, and it's kind of neat because I think you're really right, Jann, when you said that. We can teach our parents or people, you know, a generation up from us or even a little older than us, how to do things, and they can learn from us because we've been doing it for so long. And that's kind of a neat position to be in.
Susy, Sonny, I guess. We have a handicap home,
Mm-hmm.
and with her polio, you know, affects your body, your emotion. How do you shut your front door?
How do you shut the front door? I put a string on the door, on the doorknob. That's how I close it from inside. I just turn back and hit it. You know, that's what I do. I don't know.
So we use a.
Well, it's a 3-foot door. So when I go down the ramp to the garage, well, that's what my question is going to be. It's kind of funny because when we built, you said, when you got this condo, he said, tell me what you want and what you need, and I'll build it for you. And we did. We built a handicap accessible house, and the builder kind of said that to us. But, well, you know, other than the standard things like the 3-foot doors and zero entry and that type of thing, I didn't really know.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things we came across was we have ramp going down to the garage, and it's not a ramp, it's cement. It's
Cool.
zero entry.
Yeah.
But anyway, I said to my husband, the door, I have to go back up the ramp and almost inside the door because it's a 3-foot door, so I can't close it.
Yeah. You don't have a platform at the top of the ramp, then, where you can stop.
There is, but then you got to reach in and get the door.
The door's like 3 foot.
Yeah. What I do is I've got a long piece of ribbon.
Can I
doorknob.
restate the question? The question is, how do you close the door as you leave your home and get onto a ramp and the door is behind you, right? Did I say that? Okay, good.
Yeah, and I know Susie's probably got tons of ideas, but I've got this long piece of ribbon tied to the doorknob so it hangs. And then when I go out, I grab it and I keep hanging on to it until I can pull it and the door closes. And then I let go of it. It has to be long enough, though. But somebody else might have a better idea.
Okay.
Okay.
The plan that I use is I tie a string on the other side of the doorknob, run the string over the top of the door, and it just hangs down to just above ground level. Then when I go through, I can just reach the string, pull forward, it comes with me, it goes with the door. I got a piece of string hanging down the outside of the door.
So the great solutions, the inexpensive solutions that are suggested have been string over the door tied to the doorknob so you can pull it one way or the other, coming in or going out. Those are great solutions. Good, let's hear.
Good. What?
Well, I had some surgery, so I had a leg lift strap,
Mm-hmm.
and it's stiff, and it's a loop on the end. She just put it over the doorknob and just pull it.
So the
She hangs it up.
So another great solution is if you have an extra leg lifter laying around, which are a bit stiff, a long and stiff kind of handle with 2 loops on the end. He attached it to the door with a hook so that it sticks out and you can easily pull the door.
Same principle then.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jann?
But it's sturdier. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you meant an inside or outside door, since it goes in your garage. One thing about inside doors, when we were looking at doing the mother-in-law apartment for me, we converted the garage area into my living room kitchenette type of thing. And the door, there's a ramp along the side. We got rid of the front garage door, went up and put a window in there. But along the whole side of the house is my ramp going up, and the door goes in at that point, and then you can go into the kitchenette living room area, or you can go into the bathroom, which has a pocket door. When we were building it, I said I wanted a pocket door, which can go into the wall, or you can do it on the outside. I think it's called a barn door or something. You can attach it on the outside. In some areas, that might work better on a piece that goes across and 2 rollers or whatever. So that's one option, but it would be visible on the outside of the door. It wouldn't go inside. And then the other thing that somebody mentioned, but I don't know cost-wise what this is, there is a door you can get that goes up. So if you had an area that you needed to go into and whatever, and I think that, I haven't looked into it because I don't need that, I think that works on a remote control of some kind. So that would be another option to use for an inside door. And there's a lot of things out there, so keep looking for answers. And there's simple things that works great, and but these are some other options that might be helpful
Let
sometimes.
me just throw in one more idea. Inside my house, speaking of doors, I have a bedroom, and then off the bedroom is a bathroom. And the way it's configured, we just took the door off. I don't even use the door. It's hanging in my garage because it was a good way to do that, and don't have to worry about the door. So doors are a hassle. Yeah.
Another resource that you might look at, if you have thought about it, is look at arthritis, check into the Arthritis Foundation on the internet, because they have all kinds of things that people are used to that with.
What is it?
The arthritis.
The arthritis.
Arthritis.
So another tip is to use the Arthritis Foundation because their website has lots of great tips. I think that's a useful tip for another reason, which is though sometimes the Arthritis Foundation has funding for pieces of adaptive equipment. So make sure you tap into all of your chronic conditions and the agencies that might provide home modifications. I know Sunny said it gets expensive to live with a disability when you have to buy this extra stuff, and it's not typically covered by insurance. So make use of all of the different resources and agencies. So the Arthritis Foundation, the MS Society, Parkinson's disease, Spinal Cord Institute. Yes, so any other chronic condition or health condition that has similar impairments, tap into those. And if you have that chronic condition, sign up for those services too. Make sure you access services broadly is a good recommendation.
What I'm concerned about too right now at this point in my life, living alone, which I'm sure others will also think about, is just what if, because what I'd like to do is age in place. Which means that I would want to have, if I needed it, have helpers come in and help me with stuff. I already have a cleaning lady that helps me once every 2 weeks, and she's really flexible. And that's when I hired her on that premise. You're not just going to come in, tear through my house, and leave, right? No. So she helps me with all kinds of stuff, which is great. But that's once every 2 weeks, and if something were to happen and I need more help, I'm very concerned about spending money and finding personal care attendants that can help. And so that's a whole other thing that we haven't talked about, but that's going to help us age in place and age solo as well. And that's a future challenge that I'm looking at.
I think that's a great point, and thinking on down the line for attendance, which reminds me to encourage you to tap into all of the benefits that you qualify for. and realize that not all the benefits are going to be on a big marquee flashing, hey person, come in and look for me. So you might need to actually get a case manager or a social worker and get a tune-up every few years. Here are my needs, and here, what are the benefits that I'm eligible for? Medicare is one, making sure that you tap into the Part B outpatient service as well as the Part D for your medications. But what are the other potential benefits? A lot of states have personal care attendant services that require getting on a list, so planning for that waiting list is another thing to consider, but there are services out there for people that can't afford those services and need them. So
that's important. Yeah, that would make a good article in the newsletter.
I think Sunny would be a great author, don't you?
I should do it. Yeah, I need to find out.
That's the best way to find out, right? To write the article.
Yeah, it sure is.
Good.
That's true.
Yeah. Look, and then.
Speaking of the aging in place, I started thinking about it probably 10 years ago. I'm 60. But 5 years ago, I retired from the federal government. At the time, I had long-term care that they had started offering government employees that you could take over just as you could take your health insurance with you. So I continued taking that, keeping that long-term care policy for the eventuality that I would want someone to come into my home to help me. And it could be a relative. That's just how flexible that long-term care policy will allow that attendant to be. And then secondly, I have a toilet in my main bathroom. It's been giving me problems, so, every year or so it gets stopped or so. And I told my plumber, he keeps telling me, when are you going to get rid of this tub? I said, when I'm ready to really to redo the whole bathroom, because I plan to buy a step-in tub that I don't have to now sit on the toilet and nail myself into the tub. So I'm going to wait till this toilet finally gives out, and then I'm going to get the whole bathroom redone. And I'm going to get one of those step-in tubs that I can more easily get in and get out. So I started thinking about this 10 years ago, and I'm 60 now, so I don't know when it's going to happen, but prayerfully it will happen, and I'll be ready for it. So I'll do all the research I need, so when that toilet goes, I'm going to have contractors in there ready to go.
Yeah.
So
Can
I repeat that? So
Yeah,
for the
sure.
video, that was a great comment. So there were two tips. One is make sure that you carry your long-term care insurance and keep that up, because long-term care insurance is something that will give you the opportunity to bring attendants or help into the home so you can age in place. And the other tip is when things go wrong in your home, like the toilet starts breaking, make sure you can kind of plan your renovations for future accessibility around replacing those kinds of appliances. So if the 16-inch toilet goes, that's a good time to bring in the 19-inch toilet and get your bathroom renovated to the extent that you can. Thank you.
I just want to throw in an example. I have another friend who is aging alone in her home. She's owned a home for 30 years. And it got to the point where it was really dangerous for her. She used braces and crutches and scooters, and she was sliding from her toilet into her bathtub, and really dangerous stuff. And what happened for her, which was a blessing, was her church had a fundraiser to help her renovate her home, and they raised $10,000 for her. And then she was able to kick in some, and so she's got a completely accessible bathroom and a completely new accessible kitchen on top of it. So all things are possible.
All things are possible. I think we have time for one more question.
I'd like to talk about family members. I like to stay in my house. My family members are pushing me to sell it and to move into a condo or an apartment. And sometimes I think my house fights me. Like right now, it's flooding in the basement. I get a new washer. My steps broke, and then they start on me again. You're putting all this money out. Why don't you go into an apartment? I really want to stay in my home. And how do I fight this? I'm fighting against the house at times, you know.
So the question is, how do I endure the pressure from my well-meaning and loving family who want me to move into an apartment or a condo so I'll be safer, and I really want to stay in my own home? So yeah, I don't know that we have a good answer for that. I will say that you are not alone. 92% of older adults want to stay and age in place in their own home. Home is important for a lot of reasons. It's the place where we raised our children, where we have these layers of memories and place. Often it's part of a community, and that connection to community is important. So if there's one tip I can give you, that is to say, the home is difficult, but it's fixable. And the thing that I've learned that's going to help me stay vital and active is a connection to a community, and that is what I have in this home, is a connection to a place. And if I move to a condo, maybe I won't have somebody to pick me up and take me to church, or somebody to have coffee with over the fence. So those are intangible, but as you learned today, I think incredibly powerful tools to help us be successful. So even though it seems like our home is fighting us, maybe it's just waiting for an accessible bathroom. That's what it's crying out for, instead of a flood in the basement. But that is a difficult personal decision that everyone is going to have to make. So I'm sorry.
You know, for me, as I think about, well, how do you know when it's time to get a new car? You know, it's kind of the same thing. I always felt like when my car turned on me, that was it. I'm leaving, you know, and I had also been out there looking at other cars in the meantime, dreaming about what might come next, you know, and seeing what's out there. But if it becomes your enemy, then that's a time you might want to think about, maybe a new friend would be better, you know. But then again, maybe not, you know. You have to analyze it, like Susy said, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. You have wonderful questions, and I know that you enjoyed meeting this delightful group of panelists as I did. And so thank you so much for your time and ideas, and also to you for your time and ideas. Have a great rest of the meeting. Awesome. Great job. Thank you. Thanks for coming. What a great idea. I love that leg lifter strategy. What's that? Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.